Hey, what's up, witches? Since it was recently just Valentine's Day and love is in the air, I wanted to do a video about one of my favorite stories or poems in the Poetic Edda by Snorri Sturrlson, which I found is not really talked about or mentioned very much that I can find. Maybe because it doesn't really contain any of our main characters in Norse mythology. Nevertheless, the tale of the hero Svipdag, as laid out in what has come to be commonly known as the SVIPDAGSMAL, is just a fascinating story contained within the Eddas that I want to talk to you guys about today. So let's get into it. So the story outlined in SVIPDAGSMAL, or just the story or tale of Svipdag, is actually two separate poems which are known individually as Grougaldr, or Groa's Spell Chant. It contains the word Galdr. And the second part is known as Fjolsvinnsmal, or the Ballad or Song of Fjolsvith. But they form one cohesive narrative, and so they're often just grouped together under the title of SVIPDAGSMAL. It is the story of his quest to go through dangers untold and hardships unnumbered in order to rescue his destined love, his one true love, from the clutches of these frost giants that have captured her and are keeping her behind their fortress walls. And so he is sent to go on this very dangerous quest to rescue her. And the reason why I find this tale so interesting and so fascinating is not only is it just a great adventure story, a story of a hero going on a quest, tale as old as time, but because the destined bride that he's able to rescue at the end of the story is referred to as Menglod, which means something like necklace glad, or just glad in jewels or ornaments. And so my belief personally is that this may refer to Freya. We know that Freya has a husband in the myths who is called Old or Older, but it's only said by Snorri that he's often away and that Freya cries about it when he's gone. And other than that, we don't really know a whole lot about him. So as part of my whole comparative mythology deep dive that I want to start getting into here in these videos and on this channel, I really just wanted to examine this story in depth in order to figure out, is this secretly, obscurely, as part of these collections of stories that were lost before they were eventually recorded down by these later monks and whoever, where can we possibly find these more obscure stories about the gods and especially the goddesses that might have been lost to us? And so it really makes me wonder, with her having this name of Necklace Glad, and we know that Freya wears her magical, very powerful, significant necklace known only as the Rosingamen, which just means something like the necklace of the Brisings or shining necklace, depending on how you want to translate it. But this is just not only just a really interesting and cool story to read while you read about Svipdag going on his adventures, but also just because there's a lot of, I think, in-depth kernels of information to take away from it. Referring to two different notebooks here, because I'm not nerdy enough. This is kind of just my notes on the two poems overall that I wanted to talk about, and then I also have here just some of the actual stanzas written out from the tale of Svipdag itself. So what is this story? This quest of Svipdag. Who is he? Svipdag means something like swift day, and so it might be an allusion to like perhaps the rays of the sun, the sunlight itself. He's faster than the speed of light, you know, that type of thing. And he is the son of a vulva or seeress or sorceress known as Groa, which might mean just something like grower. And his father is known as Orendil or Orvendel, which means something like star, dawn, ray of light from the east, or just someone from the east. So perhaps also alluding to the sunlight or the rising sun. He might be the beams of sunlight that are coming from the rising sun. So lots of metaphors that could be gleaned and probed more in depth just with the names of these characters. But at the time of this story, sadly, Svipdag's mother, Groa, is dead. We don't know how she came to pass exactly, but he has been now set a task by his wicked stepmother, another common story trope, that he must go win his betrothed, the goddess Menglod, who has been captured or at least lives behind this like maximum security in the realm of the giants or Jotunheim, or just somewhere in that Utgard, the outermost reaches, outside the bounds of civilization as we know it. So he's been set this task to go on a very dangerous quest. It's possible, perhaps, that as we will see in a lot of, common Greek myths and things like that, that this wicked stepmother, upon marrying his father, with him then being the next in line, maybe she set him this impossible task or to go on this quest because she was kind of hoping that Svipdag was not going to return and she could just kind of get him out of the way. But nevertheless, he must go on this quest, and so his first step is to actually visit the grave mound or the burial mound of his mother, this seeress or sorceress, and to basically then journey down to meet her or call her spirit up from the gates of hell so that he can seek her advice. Svipdag goes, it's first of all just very interesting and fascinating to see him going, either going down to the gates of hell or being able to somehow go out and maybe perform like the utisetta, where you would go just sit outside, but also commonly you would go sit out on the grave of your ancestors or the burial mounds in the hopes that their spirit might come visit you and you could visit with them, seek their advice, seek their counsel. So I think that's what he's doing here. And so it's just kind of this really creepy, cool passage to read, where you're reading about the ghastly smell of death rose toward him. The darkness reached for him as he drew near the place, as dreadful as the worst of fears, the worst of nightmares. Even now he did not falter, Svipdag, swift as light. He reached the gates of Niflheim, gates of hell, far under the earth, and summoned Groa. Then the seeress Groa rose from her burial mound and came to the gates of Niflheim. So, very rarely is a mortal able to pass through these gates when they're living, but it seems like in many stories people are able to go up to, or at least approach, the gates of hell itself and talk to people there. So from there, it's also very interesting to read, and I highly recommend that you go read this story, because it gives out this very long list of charms and like protective charms that Groa is then able to lay on her son before he goes on these journeys and on this quest. And I think there are a lot of parallels between the charms that she lays on Svipdag and the charms that Odin lays out and hints at that he knows at the end of Havamal, because she's able to lay all these different protective charms on him. The first one is that he will shrug off whatever sickens him. He'll be able to rely on his own strength. She sets another charm on him to keep him from getting lost along the way or misled or led off of the path. She sets a third charm on him that though Hord and Rutha may plunge you into Niflheim, yet the waters shall part before you. There's perhaps something about if he's endangered along the road to death or the road to hell itself. If something tries to kill him or waylay him, he will not be overcome by it. Fourth, I sing lest enemies attack you along the gallows way. Your wish will be thy opponent's desires, and they shall long only for peace. Fifth, against all fetters, against all restriction of movement, I sing a freeing spell upon thy limbs. So a spell to open all locks and free his limbs from all fetters that might bind him, which might be literal or just metaphorical, like maybe like also a protection against like a binding spell. Sixth, she sings a protective storm for all storms that rage upon the sea, that no mortal wind or wave will harm thee, and you will always have fair passage. She sings a seventh charm, lest he freeze in the high rocky mountains. Fatal frost shall get no grip upon thy flesh. Eighth, the spell, lest you find your path lead you to some dismal dark place. No curse from evil spirits or witches or sorcerers will ever harm thee. And ninth, very interesting that there are 9 spells, 9 charms, and 9 is a very prominent number amongst the Aesir. Ninth, if instead you find yourself locked in a battle of wits against a Jotun, thy head will always be well stacked with wit and knowledge, and thy tongue with wise words. And all of these, I think, are very much foreshadowing for the types of perils that Svipdag ends up facing in this quest. So a lot of the charms that she lays over him are perils that he comes up against and obstacles that he comes up against on this journey that she's able to luckily have helped him with before he has to undertake it. From there, we don't really get anything elaborating in Snorri's version on the actual journey itself, because from a lot of other tales, it seems to be that even just the road down to the gates of hell itself is very perilous, so he already kind of had his work cut out for him, perhaps, even just going down to talk to Groa to begin with. And a lot of the charms that she lays on him are kind of to help one get back and forth between these realms, and for safe passage, just getting from hell back up into the mortal realm, on top of just having to then go from there all the way to Jotunheim and these harsh, dangerous outer reaches. Sadly, we don't get to hear about Svipdag's actual journey to Jotunheim or how he gets there, but we know that it would have been very dangerous and perilous just to get to Jotunheim, and it's a very dangerous and harsh place once you get there. It's Jotunheim, it's the outer reaches, and especially with this, it's the home of the frost giants, cold, harsh, winter, not friendly to people. And one thing that I'm going to elaborate on here and in the next video I want to do is that I think that not only is Svipdag at least mortal or only like semi-divine at the most, we don't really know his lineage per se, but another thing I want to talk about in my next video is the story of Freyr and Gerd as it's outlined in Skirnismal, or for Skirnis. And my theory is that Skirnis, Freyr's messenger that he sends on his behalf to woo Gerd, is none other than the Svipdag that we see introduced in this poem. I will give my arguments later for why I think that's the case, but if he's not a god, he's at most a mortal or like half god, demigod at the most. So just for him to be able to travel down to the gates of hell to speak with his mom and then have to go all the way to Jotunheim is very dangerous for him. He doesn't have a lot of powers or abilities as like a god would have or an Aesir would have. But nonetheless, he's able to make it, and at long last he comes upon a great fortress girdled by flame and guarded by a Jotun gatekeeper. And this gatekeeper's name is Fjolsvinnsmal, which means much wise. And so my theory is that perhaps instead of a story of a mortal journeying to Jotunheim to win his bride, Menglod, perhaps this is a lost version of or obscure way of referring to a story in which this mortal hero travels all the way to the gates of Asgard, and with Fjolsvid meaning much wise, perhaps this is no frost giant, but actually Odin in disguise testing him to see if he's worthy of claiming this Icelandic, I cannot pronounce this word, but like the word for a female Asgard goddess, claiming who might be Freya, this testing him to see if he's worthy of passing through to claim this divine goddess as his bride. Because I'm sure that being gods, even if it was supposed to be destiny for them to be together, Odin, he always has his own plans and his own things and his own games that he's playing behind the scenes. So he might have had a thing to say or two before he just releases this all-powerful goddess to go live with some mortal. I gotta make sure he's worthy. Svipdag comes up to the gates of what is either this fortress in Jotunheim or possibly Asgard with Odin in disguise. The Jotun just teases and taunts and scorns him, dismissing him out of hand. He says that, there are a couple different ways that you could have gotten here, but just taking one look at you probably took the easiest way. I can see it. Just go take the dewy primrose path. That's your road. You have no business here, and you will find no welcome here, the Gatekeeper Fjolsvid tells him. And so Svipdag begins to question him. He says, who are you, standing at the gate, just turning away travelers? That's not very hospitable. But you do best to go home, Fjolsvid replied, for I am Fjolsvid, and I am renowned for my wisdom. And I do not grant hospitality to just anyone. You will never set foot in this hall. You'll leave as you came, a ravenous wolf. But Svipdag was stubborn. Few men turn their backs, he says, when they mean to set eyes on their beloved. The gates of her golden hall are gleaming, and I mean to make myself at home here. So it's interesting that it appears not so much that he is rescuing this goddess Menglod from the clutches of these frost giants, but that she actually has a hall here, a home here. And there are hints in some of the other tales that Freya also has almost a very secure bower or enclosure even within her home in Asgard when she goes to live there. Loki at one point in one of the stories is forced to turn into a fly just to kind of weasel his way in because it's so well guarded and so well protected that it's very hard for people that she does not want to allow access to get to her even in Asgard. So perhaps that might be the same here. This goddess is living in this place, and Svipdag steps up and he says, I need to make myself at home here. Where's she at? Let me at her. So this giant gatekeeper, this frost giant, goes on to continue Svipdag further and asks him, well, who are you? What is your lineage? And at first Svipdag kind of tries to be a little tricky. He goes on to name himself as Vindkald, which means like cold wind, and says that he is the son of Varkald, or the cold of early spring, that his father was Fjolkald, or great cold, much cold. So perhaps he's trying to pass himself off as a fellow frost giant here, or at least deceive this gatekeeper into either thinking he's one of them or thinking that he's a lot bigger and tougher, perhaps, than his initial appearance or impression might have belied to this frost giant. And he asks, who sits upon the high seat over this hall? Who is its ruler? And he names her then as Menglod of the Necklace. Her father was Svafthorn's son, but it's not clear, even in the multitude of translations that I have looked through, what Svafthorn means, and who this father figure was. So she's a very obscure figure. This is the only place where she's really mentioned, this goddess Menglod, which just kind of makes me think that perhaps this is just another name for Freya, with the tie to her wearing a necklace. The following passages really kind of solidified it further in my mind that this might be Asgard that we're talking about. Because, really, Merlin? Really? All over the Nerthus altar back there? Come on, brah. Anyway, so excuse any glare on my glasses now. I'm having to open the curtain for the cat. It could just be that since this is a frost giant's fortress, that it has all these very tough, ominous names being given to the different places here, but we know that Asgard is also an enclosure with a wall, and it's nigh impenetrable, and the only way to get through it is to either be allowed through the gates or through Bifrost, you know? You have to basically be granted access to it to get in. And so the fact that he goes on to reveal that the gate of this place is called Gastropnir, the Guest Crusher. I made it myself long ago from the bones of a clay giant, Leirbrimir, and braced it so firmly that it will endure for as long as the earth itself. And we know that Odin and his brothers made Midgard and perhaps even the enclosure of Asgard from the body of a giant Ymir, and that they also requested the help of a giant to construct the wall of Asgard. So either the giants were just the people to go to if you needed a really good wall built, or this could actually be another hint that this is actually the gates of Asgard that he is approaching. Because they kind of go on to then engage in that battle of wits that Groa warned him against and charmed him against before he left, because they go back and forth asking each other all these riddles and these questions that we see in many of the other stories of the Poetic Edda. And within this, having this battle, it's also revealed that there are two wolves guarding the gate. Svipdag asks what they are and if there's any way to get past them. Is there any way to sneak past if he can't get through the gate? It's then revealed by this frost giant that the name of the wolves are Geri, which is the same as Odin's wolf, Geri and Freki, and that this other wolf is called Gif, which, like Geri and Freki, also just means hungry or greedy. Now, it's my theory that if this does not actually refer to Odin's wolves as guard dog or wolves in and of themselves, and that this is a journey taken to Jotunheim and not the gates of Asgard, because it could be either that this mortal Svipdag is trying to ascend up the tree of Yggdrasil, claim his goddess bride, or he has to go all the way to Jotunheim, which is a very perilous journey. And so my theory, because they go on to talk about how these wolves, they never sleep. One is always watchful, and so it's impossible to get past them. And the only way to get past them is to get a feather from a bird at the edge of the world, the bird whose wings make a great wind, and the great wind will do something to put them to sleep. So it makes me wonder if it's a metaphor for them perhaps being like a volcano or something like that. These two greedy, ravenous, consuming wolves, as the magma would override and consume the land itself. Or just it being this dangerous, precarious place to try to get past, like how one does not simply walk into Mordor, one does not simply walk past these wolves to get into this enclosure. But that's just one of my other theories. Either way, as they go on and go back and forth having this exchange, it soon becomes very clear why this is almost a nigh impossible quest his stepmother has handed him. Because he asks, how can I get past these two guard dogs? Is there nothing that I can give them to call them off or distract them? Fjolsvin answers that he must feed them the meat from the wings of the giant bird Vitofnir, the tree snake, which could either be the rooster Gullinkambi, which sits atop the doors to Valhalla, or, as I said, the giant bird at the edge of the world, whose wing beats create the winds. So he says, okay, I gotta get meat from this bird. what do I use to kill this giant primordial bird creature? And the giant says, well, there is a weapon, interestingly enough, that Loki made. Leivatin, the wounding wand. So he says, what is the weapon with which I can kill this bird, Vidofnir, and send him to the house of hell? And the giant answers, the only weapon that he can use to kill it is the sword Leivatin, the wounding wand, and that Loki made it, forged it with runes at the gates of Niflheim. It lies in Legion's chest, guarded by 9 locks, and Sinmora watches over it. So, it's kind of a paradox. He needs to get past the wolves. To get past the wolves, he's got to feed them the meat from a bird. To kill the bird and send it to hell, he has to go down to hell first and get a sword. So this sword is locked in a chest all the way down in hell. So he's got to go all the way down there to get it, which, as I've said, is no easy task for a living mortal or even semi-divine person. You know, like, even the gods themselves can't just travel back and forth from hell willy-nilly. Like, only certain gods or gods with, like, certain things like Sleipnir can go to these places and come back. Especially for a mortal, you could only go up to the gates of hell. If you're going through the gates of hell, you did. And you're not coming back out. He asks, how can a man even hope to gain this weapon and come back with it unscathed? So the frost giant says that you can hope to steal it if you take what few can win as a gift for Sinmara. In your pouch, take Vidofnir's tail feather and give it to her. So it's really like kind of going in circles and just sending him on this hopeless quest. Because to get past the wolf, he needs to kill the bird. To kill the bird and send it to hell, he has to go to hell and find a magic sword. And to get the magic sword, he needs the bird. Luckily, Svipdag has an ace up his sleeve. They continue having this battle of wits. And as he goes on, he keeps asking questions about, like, what is this place? Who made it? Who lives here? What are the goddesses like? Do they help people? And kind of gives us a little bit of the few passages that we have on goddesses. Eventually, in the course of this riddle battle or battle of wits, he says, you know, well, is there anyone who can come in and get access to these goddesses? And the frost giant says, well, yeah, the only person that can come in and see Menglod is her destined bridegroom, Svipdag, the one known as Svipdag. And then Svipdag is finally able to kind of reveal his true identity and say, oh, that's me. I am Svipdag, son of Sjöldbjart, Sunbright. I have traveled wind-cold ways to reach this place. No man can deny Urd, though her gifts be unearned. And so the frost giant then at that point has no choice but to let Svipdag in, and Freya Menglod is able to go out to meet him. And sadly, once she says, hey, like, at long last, you're finally here, I've been waiting for you, I'm so happy to see you, let's kiss. That's where the story ends, sadly. So we don't really know a whole lot about it from there, unfortunately. If indeed Menglod is Freya, regardless of whether Svipdag is saving her from the home of the frost giants, or undergoing a test, a battle of wits with Odin himself in disguise to win this divine bride for himself and earn a place among their ranks, it's still a really cool story. I could go deeper into the different, like, specific place names and things and information that is revealed in this battle of wits back and forth with Fjolsvid that he has, because it's really interesting to think about some of the perhaps metaphorical things being alluded to. But that's a kind of a deep dive for another video. I think it really helps to lead into some of the arguments that I want to make in my next video about Skirnismal and the story of Freyr and Gerd, which is why I have him back here, because it's, you know, kind of a love story, but also kind of a weird one. And I think is just also part of just this whole archetypal tale as old as time, and there are a lot of deeper meanings to it as well. Some of the information that we kind of set up about Svipdag here, I think, is also part of what leads me to make my argument for that, in that story, for why I think this envoy, Skirnir, that Freyr sends on his behalf to try to get Gerd to marry him, I think that that person is actually Svipdag. That's something that I will kind of go into in my next video about Freyr and Gerd and that story. I just really wanted to talk to you guys about the SVIPDAGSMAL, or Grougaldr and Fjolsvinnsmal, as you will see them referred to separately, because 10 out of 10 would recommend you guys go read this just for the sheer amount of information as far as like the spell charms being laid out for anyone that wants to get into the witchcraft, magic, Galdr side of things. Just seeing all those charms laid out and elaborated on in this poem is cool. And then for anyone who's just kind of a mythology buff or wants to kind of get into the cosmology or world building side or Norse cosmology side of things, some of the information exchanged back and forth in the Battle of Wits or Riddle Battle is really cool to go in and look at. Gives you some kind of things outside of just the Prose Edda and like Voluspa and Gylfaginning, where you'll see those things referred to more often and more often cited. There's a lot of little hidden cool tidbits of information along with just a really cool adventure story laid out in this poem. Go along with it also, if in my opinion, if you take my word for it, a hidden story about this mortal hero or semi-divine hero going to win Freya as his bride. So let me know what you think about this if you've read it, because for me, this is probably my #1 favorite poem in the Poetic Edda. It's my favorite one. I just think it's the most interesting. It tells a really cool story, and it touches on some more obscure people and characters that we don't really see mentioned a lot in any other tales. Go check it out. Let me know what you think about my theory that either this is perhaps either a journey to Asgard itself and Odin in disguise, or that it might be perhaps referring to Freya under this name of Menglod. Yeah, sound off. Let me know what you think about these theories. I think it's a really cool story, and I hope you go read it and that you let me know what you think and that you enjoyed this crazy, long, quick, rambling video about it. So until next time, stay classy, pagans.